Good morning and welcome to all of you in Zoom or here in person, and the people in person have signed in at the door. There are only a few of us here, so that works fine. I'm glad we have Zoom as an alternative. So who we have in the room right now is Ian Horswell, who is our Rising Tide Engineering President and presenter, yes. And Jamie Moncayo, and I probably messed up the way that I said that, but she is the General Manager of Napili. Kano Taikano is next, and he is the General Manager of Napili Surf Beach Resort, and Greg Nelson, who is the General Manager of Napili Kai Beach Resort and our host here today, and me, Pat Lindquist, President of the Napili Bay and Beach Foundation. So we're doing this here for the people who are on site and by Zoom, so technological challenges this morning, but I think we're ready to start. I'd like to go around the room with Zoom people, and I'm not sure how to do that. Yvonne, can they introduce themselves and say what organization they're from?
If you really want that to happen, we've got about 26 people total.
Okay.
I get a little confusing. I am taking everybody's name down.
Okay, we'll just proceed. All right, well, thank you all for taking the time to come, and we are recording it so that people who can't be here real time can see it later. But let me start by telling you, giving you a brief summary, and then I will turn it over to Tova Callender, who I forgot to introduce. And Tova is going to be presenting the water quality picture that we've been collecting data on for about 5 years now. So she will be following me, and then it will be Ian telling us about the plans for the beach restoration, and then I will come back on and tell you the ways that we're looking to fund it and how we're doing. Okay, so first slide. So Napili Bay and Beach Foundation has been very focused on our overall goals. The first one being to restore the beach because it's a natural buffer for the coastline against erosion damage caused by the rising sea levels that
Slide 2.
we're seeing now. So part of that, and a beginning part of that, is to remove the hard structures that are causing or are damaged by coastal erosion. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later, our first project. The second part of it is to restore our coral reef, because again, that will protect the coastline against further damage. But first we have to restore the beach in order to protect against further losses in water clarity and reef health. And then the third way that we are framing our work is by raising funds to do the work that's needed to accomplish number 1 and number 2. Next slide, please. Now, I'm going to introduce Tova Callender. She's head of Ridge to Reef, West Maui Ridge to Reef, and she's going to present the Napili Bay water quality story for the last few years. Tova? Are you there? Unmute yourself. Oh, I don't hear her.
Tova?
Thank you. Just FYI, you have to grant permission for people to unmute. So thank you for doing that. Oh. And thank you for the introduction, Pat. As mentioned, I'm with the West Maui Ridge to Reef Initiative, one of 3 partners who manage the Water Quality Coalition, Huio'okawaiola, in partnership with the Nature Conservancy and Maui Nui Marine Resource Council. I know a lot of you are very familiar with this, so I won't get into a lot of our structure, and we'll dive right into the data. But just a few basic things. This is a community and grant funded effort in support of the Department of Health's desire and our shared desire to have longstanding water quality data. It's taken every 3 weeks with a team of volunteers led by staff walking into the water up to their knee. So it's near shore water. Great. So let's jump into what we test for. So we test for 12 parameters, both chemical and physical. The physical parameters are done on the day, on site, and that gives us one aspect of what we need to understand: pH, dissolved oxygen, temperature, salinity, and turbidity. And then for the chemical parameters, those samples need to be sent off to a lab in Oahu associated with UH Manoa, where we test for the nitrates, ammonium, total nitrogen, phosphate, and total phosphate and silicates. So some of the data we get quickly, and some of the data there's a little bit of time lag. You'll see in the balance of this presentation that I'm focusing really just on 2 parameters. Next. Who's doing slides? Next slide. Right. Yep. The nitrate and the turbidity. Yep. Because those are what we find to be most useful for understanding what's impacting what we care about, which is nearshore marine life, including coral reefs, and the use of the water. And it's where we have the ability to potentially manage for the problems that we're identifying over time. Next slide. So jumping into nitrate, nitrate, nitrogen, which I'll just abbreviate from here on out and call nitrates. You can see when compared to the sites on either side of Napili Bay, which throughout this presentation will be marked with the dark blue arrow, it's not doing too badly. The red line denotes the state standard set by Department of Health for nitrates. So all sites in this region of West Maui do exceed that state standard, but the Napili levels of nitrates are not nearly as concerning as Kapalua or Ka'opala. Please bear in mind that these are all based on geo-means. So that's kind of a fancy average of all the data that has been taken over the last 5 years. So it's not a single point in time, it's looking at it over time as an average. So not too bad. Sometimes I find it helpful to better understand where you stand when you look at the bigger region. So next slide, please. If we look at this within the context of all of Leeward Maui, which is where Huio'owai'ola currently is sampling, you can look again for that blue arrow marking where Napili Bay is. And I don't expect you to read the names that are down there. Rather, just look at the region. So that first block takes us from Honolua to Wahikuli. And you can see relative to that block for nitrates, it's not too bad. Next, as we move from Lahaina to the Pali, you notice the nitrate levels are a good bit lower there. Interesting side note is that all of the agriculture in that area stopped before we had much sooner than where it stopped in the other regions. So as we move along to the next block from Ma'alaia North Kihei, you see there we've got the nitrates spiking again. And of course, that's where we had sugarcane until relatively recently and continue to have some ag going there. Just interesting to note. I also like to point out Kealia Pond. If you ever have the chance to champion for a wetland, there's the one truly functioning wetland in our area, and look at how well it's dealing with what's happening around it. And from Kihei to Ahiki now, Cove Park always steals the show as being the outlier for where nitrates are really high. Previous work done by USGS and many others have implicated wastewater in those really high levels. So looking back at Napili, it's not terrible relative to overall, but it isn't meeting state standards either. Next slide. So to make it a little bit easier to see, there's a tiny green line there. So everyone above is worse, everyone below is better. So it's, you can see, it's fair, kind of middle of the road. Next slide, please. I'd like to share a time series, but first just have to do a quick explanation of how we know that the nutrients are connecting to the coast. So we are seeing a very high correlation in the areas where we have high nutrients with silicates. So silicates are making their way out through the rock. So we know it's coming through groundwater. This is a graphic here doing a regression for Kapalua Bay, and you can see its R-squared value is very high, it's 0.91. So we know when we have more groundwater, we have more nitrates coming in, which means that when there's that lower tide, there's going to be more nitrates coming out. And when the tide is higher, it kind of puts a cap on that groundwater, which is making its way out into the ocean. So this is all to explain that in the next graph, next slide, please.
Yes.
We're looking at a time series where it's been corrected for that tide state. So in order to take out that variability, since we only collect every 3 weeks, we're hitting a different tide state. So if you just look straight up at the data we collect every 3 weeks, it can kind of skew your understanding of what's happening. So since we're correcting for the tide here, you can see we had a bit of a spike in Napili throughout 2019, and it does seem to be improving now after the fall of 2020. So perhaps a trend moving in the right direction, but likely not quite enough time to really know that for sure. Next slide, please. Your neighbors there in Kapalua have a slightly clearer story. There were some significant improvements made to their wastewater infrastructure. The pump station and other parts of the county wastewater treatment work that took place in 2019 might be what's responsible for significantly lower levels of nitrates. So we're always looking for examples where we actually see an intervention take place and then see the response in the data. So potentially hopeful in that area. Next, please. Because our goal is not only to track what's happening, but also to be able to do something about it, we have done some additional testing so that we can figure out what the quote unquote flavor of the nitrogen is coming out, because you can't act on it unless you know what it is. So to that end, we've done some N15 nitrogen analysis with taking seaweed off of the rocks and seeing what flavor emerges when we look at it that way. And we've also tested for some persistent pharmaceuticals. And both of those have indicated that there is some human contribution to what's going on in the water in the Pele. But we can't rule out legacy agriculture as also being a reason why there's elevated nutrients in that area. Next, please. So moving on to turbidity, so the second parameter we're going to focus on. Many of you have seen this graphic before. This is what Dana and Bill put together when they were still here on island to give you a number and a mental way to kind of bookmark. What does it mean when the turbidity is 1.14 NTU? Well, you can't really see your friend snorkeling anymore. So just that small level of elevation and you really are losing water clarity, which is what turbidity is measuring. So with that as a mental benchmark, next. We look at our data for Napili relative to its neighbors from Honolulu to Kahana Village. And we see, well, you know, it's not too bad for turbidity, except those really high values are in the areas where they're receiving stream inputs periodically. So Honolulu Bay, Ka'opala, and Kahana all have streams that are introducing a lot of legacy sediment in. So it might not really be fair to compare what you have in an area where you are not having that connectivity, thanks to the hard work of your organization in getting the Napili Dam 4.5 retrofit. As you know, that's rarely overtopping anymore. And it's really been very effective in trapping that stream source sediment. So when you look at it from that standpoint, it's fairly turbid, especially when you think about how you can't see your friend snorkeling at half of the level that the geomeans are for this area. Next slide. If we look across in the entire leeward side of our island, you'll notice no sites meet the state standards. That's the little line at the bottom. And Napili is not doing terribly. Next slide. There's our little green line. So everyone below is doing better than Napili. You can see more than half the sites are above doing worse. So Honolulu to Wahikuli, there's a lot of turbidity problems. But really, again, you kind of have to separate who's got streams and who doesn't. Lahaina to the Pele is, you know, it's a pretty turbid stretch. Ma'alai to North Kihei is a little bit better. And in Kihei, as we saw recently in the storms from December 6th, can really pump a lot of sediment through those streams when we get rain events, and then it resuspends over time. So Napili, it's not too bad in the mix, but not great. Next. So our causes of turbidity, as we've talked about, is those rain events can drive sediment to light up the streams and push that through. And we saw this very clearly looking up and down by the old bridge and up to Napili 4.5 with Tropical Storm Olivia in 2018, which made a mess of the bay and persisted for a while. Next slide. And then we know coastal erosion is a huge issue. So here's a few events that don't have anything to do with rain and are clearly driving that water clarity in a direction that we don't like to see. So let's look at how this is coming out in another way of looking at the data. Next slide, please. So if we're looking at this as a trend over time, that outlier event makes it look like it's not too bad. Next. But when you look at what's causing this, it's interesting to note that the first two were rain events and the last was king tide. Now, I'll caution to say, wait, this means that the coastal erosion is, the only source and it's the big thing. You have to remember, because we're not testing continuously, when we sampled with our every 3-week increments relative to when the event happened is going to kind of skew this. And we are again looking at, yes, so let's zoom in the next slide here.
This one.
So just getting a little lower. So we've put the purple line on the bottom. So that's the line where it's hard to see your friend when snorkeling. If you look at that kind of baseline level of water clarity, you see that in 2017, there were more days that you could really go out and expect to have a nice experience in the water. And as you get more recent, pushing into 2020 there, you see there are more and more days where the line is exceeding that purple bar. So that's telling us, okay, we are seeing that coastal erosion is tipping in the direction of creating more kind of baseline turbidity happening more frequently in the bay. Next slide. We are not done trying to explore this question. So I know you're all familiar with the wave run-up model that PAC-IOS has put out that's really helpful for knowing when you're going to get a doozy there in the Pele Bay. And so we have submitted a request to get the data that's behind these predictions and then the ultimate event so that we can look at, okay, what days were there high wave events? And then how do we match that with our rainfall data and with our water quality data to better tease out the answer to the question, how much of coastal turbidity in these areas is increasingly driven by erosion and high wave events versus rain events. So stay tuned. We don't have the data from PAC-IOS yet, but when we do, we're really looking forward to, as a team, digging into that. Next, please. The other next. So in summary, you can see Napili Bay is not quite hitting state standards for either nitrates or turbidity, but when you look at it relative to Leeward, Maui, it's not terrible. There's certainly room for improvement. We're going to need to monitor for longer to really understand the nitrate picture over time and see whether we continue to see that downward trend. And it does appear that the baseline turbidity is going up, which isn't good news, and except for that's why the next block of this meeting is looking at solutions for that. So next slide, please. Just FYI, our next report, our regional report, which will summarize all this data and more, will be coming out the first quarter of this year. You can access Huakapai data at any time at our website. And the neat little tool in the bottom there, you can do data visualization on the spot for whatever parameter and site you're interested in at this PAC-IOS link. Super cool resource if you just kind of want to see what's going on for anything. It could be temperature, it could be salinity, any of the things that we're monitoring for. You can check out at PAC-IOS here. Next. Thank you to Napili Bay and Beach Foundation, who has been one of our funders since who we began in 2016. It's only possible to do this work because of the support of the community and the community volunteers that do it. So thank you for that. Next. And we would be delighted to send you a regional report for our water quality data once it's out. We would also be delighted to come and bring a presentation to you either virtually or in person if your group is interested. So if you're interested in either of those or have other questions or comments past this meeting, please feel free to reach out. My phone number and email are there, as well as our email for Kuyoka Viola. And I think now would be a good time if there were questions.
Yes, thank you, Tova. And questions, if you're on Zoom, please shoot your questions in the chat, and Yvonne will verbalize them. That's probably the easiest way. And in the room, does anybody have questions for Tova on the water quality side of things? Well, in the room, we're okay. Yvonne, how's it looking from Zoom? Do you have questions?
I have a question from a Leonard Nakoa. Go ahead, Leonard. Leonard, can you hear us? Go ahead, you're unmuted.
You hear me?
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I was sorry, saying two meetings. I did the county council and this one. Yeah, but I'm following the. I said, Tara, good morning. Good job on this presentation. Awesome. Good numbers. I'm following all beach restorations. Yeah, the one in Kanapali, the one in Kahana, and the one in Napili. I got notified about this meeting from Angus McKelvey. But you know, with the visibility, you know what you said, Tara, the turbidity or whatever, the nitrates, and all of that. All my years of living here, I live here all my life. I live in Napili Hall. So Napili Bay is my background. It's our beach and learn how to skimboard and all of that. What you call all this visibility, no can see your friends swimming and all that stuff. The number one thing you forgot to say was the tourists. Because when had the pandemic, in the beginning of the pandemic, woohoo, this Hawaiian, you love going down there. The beach was clear. If you go take picture doing that, oh, bye, you can see far. But yeah, so these numbers is good, and like you said, yeah, Tara Owens. It's not terrible. It's not. It's good. The beach is shared. Why do you think tourists go over there every time? Yeah. So your numbers about all the stuff, and then you're talking about the erosions. The number one thing is to close the buildings to the beach and all that stuff. And that's what's the main problem. I know all you guys over here live on this thing. You know, I'm against that big Greg Brown project that's happening right up the road. That project, choke dirt gonna come into the bay because of that project, because it's built wrong. So that's me as a long time resident, and I fight for our community, and I wish Angus McKelvey first was on this meeting, because he don't told me come over here. I wish you guys would invite us, the locals, the guys that go there every day. Kick back, relax, you know. I don't go there every day. Too much business on this damn political thing. But try to invite us, then we can work together. I know it divers that go over there. They told me for stand up for the people and no do nothing. No, let the beach be the beach. No, we shouldn't be God. We're not God. We're just dumb humans that we screw up the place. And that's what Tara said in her report. It's a human factor is the big one. Yeah, so I support fixing the stairway. Now, you guys trying to build, you're raising money for build. I support that bugger. But please, don't screw up our ocean. You guys are saying about fixing the coral. Leave the coral alone. The only way you can fix the coral is tell the big buggers no go step on them. Tell them no use the right suntan lotion. That's how you're gonna protect the coral. Leave it alone. The fish is good. You're plenty fish out there. Plenty. I can show you. I can tell you right now. We can go dive and go fish over there. We show you guys where the things stay. But sorry for babbling. But I'm so passionate about this bay, Kahana Bay, Kanapali Bay. So we know we know we'll be part of the solution, not the problem. Okay, mahalo. Sorry for taking a lot of time. Shoot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yvonne, anybody else? Any
Nope.
other?
Nothing else in the chat room.
Okay, thank you so much, folks who are participating by Zoom, and thank you, Junia, for that. And then I want to turn it over now to Ian Horswell, who is president of Rising Tide Engineering, and he is going to tell us what we've done, what we are doing now, and the plans for the future for restoring our beach. Ian?
Aloha all. I'm Ian Horswell, your engineer in charge of the beach restoration. Thanks, Pat, for the kind introduction. I'll move along here. So what's happening? What's causing the beach to erode? Well, just for numbers, so you can measure or compare, we lost over 900 cubic yards in the year 2019 to 2020. And a decade before, a whole decade, the average was only 560 cubic yards per year. So erosion is getting worse. When you do it over a decade, you can really see the trend. And over that decade, we lost some 6,500 cubic yards of sand into the low spots in the reef and out off the beach. And we lost 7.5 feet of beach width. So what's causing this? Well, increased storminess, large waves, king tides, rising sea levels, and the loss of nearshore coral reef are driving beach erosion to new levels of wave runup. The lower the beach is compared to the sea level, the more the wave can run up, and it can result in continued beach narrowing. So there's two mechanisms that work here. One, the wave runs up and then drags out the sand to the surf zone. And then the second mechanism is longshore drift, where the sand gets taken by currents and waves oblique to the shoreline. That's not straight on. And it takes the sand down every summer, and every winter it changes directions. So we need to make sure we've got a wider, higher, thicker beach. So I mentioned about the cross-shore drift. I wanted to say that in summer, the sand moves from the north, and in winter, the sand moves south. And quite a bit of it moves into the areas, the low spots offshore. Okay, so
Slide 25.
slide 25. Thanks, Pat. So the basic needs for this project are make the beach wider, higher, and thicker. A wider beach will allow the beach to dissipate more wave energy, which means the waves don't run up the beach as far, which means less sand gets eroded. A higher beach lessens the upper reaches of the waves, so you have to get really peak storm or king tides to reach up. So what happens is we want to, like in the past, you want a larger, wider, I should say, dry beach called the berm. This is where most beach goers place their towels and beach items. A thicker beach is needed to fill in the eroded sections of the beach to make it wider and higher, because you can't do one without the other. And this picture, I think, Pat, it's from the 1970s. 71. Let's look at how wide, if that's like well over 100 feet width, 125 feet. That's the 1970s. And now the beach is considerably narrower. Okay, so So what we're proposing to do is reproduce part of the old beach by restoring it to its width and its thickness from 1990. That's the basic design concept. The other good part is that we are going to use sand that was on your beach. So the sand that we're going to dredge was on the beach. We're now going to put it back on the beach. So really, we're not adding any new sand in to the system. And the other two important design features are that we're going to put in a vegetated dune with natural vegetation, aki-aki, bohui-hui, etc., at the very back of the berm, right up against the property line, which will provide an extra supply of sand. If the waves get up that high, it'll drag that sand that's held by these native plants and will allow it to push down onto the beach, which helps in storm events. The last thing is that we're hopefully planning to get involved with is coral restoration, and taking Junior Nakoa's point about leaving it alone and letting it recover would be a great thing. Unfortunately, a lot of the coral in the bay is diseased and dead or dying. Healthy reefs dissipate a lot of wave energy and protect the beach against rising sea levels, and it does slow erosion, but we're being very careful. I've shown a reef ball in there with corals growing on it. It's just one of the things that we're looking at. There's all sorts of solutions. Next slide. 26 is, so what we're showing here is we're showing the design from overview and then a typical cross section, if you can see that. Our original design allows up to 19,000 cubic yards of fill sand, and that should widen the beach by up to 25 to 30 feet from its current width, which would take it back to a historic width of 1990. This design shape will allow sand to move from the north to south. So we would do it in the fall when the sand starts normally moving south. So the extra sand would move south and fill in the southern part of the beach, which is a good plan. Design builds beach profiles or cross sections that fit the natural shape of the beach. We're not going to change the shape of the beach. That's not a good thing to do. But if you widen and thicken it will be the same shape of beach, just wider and thicker. Right now, that profile, I'm showing that profile number 3, if you can see the slide, it's in white. It shows that the width at the far right is now, the new width is 28 feet from the current width. And the height of what we call the dry berm is 12.5 feet above mean sea level, which will be a little higher than the worst storms can reach. And then you know that when you sit on a berm, it's very flat. So this is a 1 to 30 design, and it will run up to the back of the properties where it will then run into the vegetated dune. And that should always be dry except for the worst storm events, which is what we're trying to build here. Okay, so a lot of people have that get to see slide 27. The people that get to see a beach restoration at the start get to see what happens when the sand is stripped away quickly. And it's called profile equilibration or equilibration. It's the loss of the initial fill. If you could see that darker orange equilibration fill wedge of sand, that will disappear. By no means does that mean the project has failed. In fact, it's there as a sacrificial wedge of sand to fill in the surf zone, which will also dissipate wave energy. So that's important to note. So this retreat will slow down as soon as the profiles have reached equilibrium. And that volume could be as much as 2,000 cubic yards, but nothing to worry about. But we'd add in extra sand just for that purpose. So moving on to the work that's been done in 2021 and 2022.
Slide 28.
Slide 28. So led by Pat's and the crew have been applying for the FEMA BRIC grant, and they're progressing the community facilities district funding and reviewing other grants. So that's critically important work and very tough slogging. Unfortunately, the FEMA BRIC grant didn't come through this year, but we go on undeterred. The detailed design, we finished the detailed design for the beach. We've developed the county SMA, SSA, FDP applications and submitted them. This is all in 2021. The state, we are waiting on the approval of the streamlined OCCL permit process and expect some direction in early 2022. And we've reached out to a number of agencies as well that are required to be consulted with, such as NOAA, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, etc. They don't require permits, but they require consultation with the DLNR OCCL, which is the head of the process. So looking at the jumped ahead there. So in 2021, we finished off the year by doing a shoreline certification survey, and it's at the moment being drafted. In early 2022, we'll look to see if there's any encroachments and discuss this with the property owners to help remove the encroachments, the odd bush or a stair that's, in the way. We'll have to recertify or resurvey and recertify. And what this is called it's called the Shoreline Certification, and it's required in each and every one of these permits. We have to do it. The Napili Bay and Beach Foundation have long been about community outreach, and they continue to do great work in that regard. They are, since 2006, since they became a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, they have talked about plans to do scientific studies with all the community, and they've continued to build on that. So that's underway, and they're ramping up on that side as well. The National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System is an application that is needed by the EPA. Point number 4 is we're also developing the applications for the Department of Army, the Section 10 and 404, which is almost duplicated by the DOH water quality certification. Point number 5, the water quality certification 401 needs to be submitted as well. And then, of course, the State Historic Department or Preservation Department, the SHPD, needs to have a review and an application if required. Hopefully we don't require that. The development of the application for the Coastal Zone Management CZM, and we need to apply there. And then finally, back to the application and moving forward with the Community Facilities District to fund the costs of this project. Slide 29. Okay, so I've mentioned, you all are probably aware of what beach nourishment is, but basically it's bringing sand in to fill what has been lost to erosion, longshore drift, and other reasons. And by creating a wider beach with new sand, it becomes possible to prevent future damage to coastal structures. Oftentimes there's this misunderstanding of what the consequences are of beach nourishment. You can read articles online and you'll get different opinions. So we look at this, we're required by county, state, and federal governments to look at this through the applications, and it's very healthy because it gives us insight. We look ourselves in the mirror to see if we're doing the right thing. So potential negative impacts and how we reduce the risk or mitigate them. Point number one is it may be difficult to find materials that are similar to what is at the beach. Fortunately, the state mandates the offshore sand grain size and color and the amount of fines in the sand offshore that you want to put onto the beach sand. You need a good match for the project to work. So fortunate for Napili, there are excellent quantities and there's excellent quality sand in large volumes near the beach. That's very important. The fill sand, point number two, when new settlements are added to the beach, they may bury marine life and create cloudy, turbid water. Tova did a great job on explaining the turbidity. And so the fill sand, on the science side of suspension, the fill sand is medium grained, mostly medium grained. There is some small grained, but it doesn't suspend in water, in the water column very long. And the benthic habitat in the bay are used to temporary cover of sand. It's the normal state, especially for sessile creatures such as sponges, nudibranches, et cetera, that don't have their own locomotion to get around. They're used to being covered and uncovered. And as I said, Tova did a great job on the turbidity, so I won't go back there. So point number three, can the public or residents use the beach during the nourishment project? Well, safety is key. You got big earth movers moving sand around and you've got this dredge pumping sand in. However, there can be limited beach access as the sand nourishment moves along the beach. The project will require about 35 days, including mob and demob, and you have to add in a weather window of at least a week in that to make sure you can get everything done. So point number four of potential negative impacts. Most locations require repeated nourishment application for work to be effective. It's true. The project will likely need renourishment in 10 years. And the cost of doing nothing or retreat doesn't make sense while you still have a beautiful beach left. And we should make every effort to do a great beach restoration before we take the next steps. Slide 30. Okay, so Tova had great shots from overhead. I'm taking this, I believe, Pat, was this your photo?
I think it was Yvonne's.
Yvonne, great photo, Yvonne. So that chocolate brown close up, that is soil from the trees, the palms and the back of the front yards that's being pulled out by the king tide that happened in July of 2019. And that sand stayed in suspension for a long time. So we've got with beach nourishment acting as a filter, as well as the great work that's been done on the desilting basins, we should be able to minimize events such as these. Okay, slide 31. So on the potential positive impacts, by creating a wider, thicker, higher beach with new sand, it becomes possible to prevent future damage to coastal structures. Well, that's the case. That we've designed to restore the beach back to its historic shape from 1990. The dry berm should be above the highest reach of the waves. And then in the emergency situation with this small 4-foot high vegetated dune, that gets us to about 17.5 feet above mean sea level. which is well above anything that should happen other than a hurricane perhaps or a tsunami. Hopefully they don't happen. So the next point, a new beach provides a filter to minimize turbidity. Yes, the turbidity from tree and resort soils can be minimized by having this sand filter. Essentially, sand filter has been around in nature and in industrial purposes for a very long time, and sand does a great job of filtering. Point number 3, a wider beach creates more recreation space and space for monk seal haul out, which does happen at Napili Beach from time to time. That's right. So that says it all. We widen the upper dry beach area, and on the occasion that a monk seal needs a haul out, they have a spot to relax. Number 4, no rock grinds minimizes the project cost and maintenance required. Not only does it minimize the project cost and maintenance required, it also maintains the beauty of Napili Beach, which is spectacular. If you put it up against any beach in the world, it's I've got to say in the top 10 or 20 beaches. So it's really important to maintain that natural look. The restored beach allows time to consider other coastal resiliency planning and as adjustments to such as adjustments to the beach design and future alternatives such as managed retreat. Eventually, everybody on the islands is going to have to look at managed retreat, but doing a beach restoration now gives it 7 to 10 year time to start planning, to tweak the beach restoration design to make it better, and also to consider alternatives that are medium to long term, such as managed retreat. So I am now on slide 32. Sorry, just bouncing around here. Project accomplishments of the Pele Bay and Beach Foundation since 2006. There have been so many, they're hard to list. It started with offshore sand source studies and benthic habitat assessment in 2007, 2008. The desilting work on 4-5 Basin, the design and installation of a functional outlet valve in 2011, the stream bed clean out and replanting in 2014, all the great work in water testing by Tova and Diane's teams in 2015 to present, confirmation of offshore sand source in 2018, that was done by our group, Rising Tide Engineering. The beach profile, the benthic habitat transit study, those are all studies that were initiated through the Napili Bay and Beach Foundation and done by Rising Tide. Beach profile in winter of 2020, and then the county and state permit applications to date, which we're getting on with. So the last slide is community outreach. And I've got to say, this is something that Napili Bay and Beach and all the resorts have been doing and in earnest since 2017, although they started back in 2006, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation. This helped plan studies for improving the beach and focused on the bay and beach health. And I should mention that starting back in 2006, the mission for the NBBF has been the health of the bay and beach, restoring the health of the bay and beach. And so this beach restoration is one piece of that larger project that Pat and her team have been working on for a long time. And it's a critical piece, of course. They've done a lot of on-site meetings. They've got a new website. Their fundraising campaigns are ongoing. If you have anybody that wants to fund, please jump in on the website and you can fund on there to donate any amount you want. the frequent communications with the county planning department and the council have been ongoing, and they've built substantial partnerships with the county and the state. These efforts are continue with small and large meetings such as this one. Their NBBF are looking forward to continued support, funding support, perhaps out of the Community Facilities District. And we've done some updates. We've now, for everybody's outreach, got what we call Tech Talks, a technical section on the website. That is it for me. I hope this was interesting. And if you have any questions, please shoot them through the chat.
All right, thank you so much, Ian. And I'll take questions from within the room, the people who are here in person first, and then Yvonne can take any questions from folks participating by Zoom. Please put them in the chat and she can call on you or restate them. So questions from the room for Ian, please.
Pat, I don't have a question necessarily, but
This
No,
is
I can ask
Nani Aluli is.
yeah,
speaking.
Nani Aluli, the GM for the Mauian Hotel, right in the center of Napili Bay. And the property that I manage is owned by my family. My uncle was one of the first people to develop on this beach, either sadly or happily, depending on who's observing or who's making comments about what happened on Napili Bay. And just a couple of comments, if I could.
Please.
You know, I think all of the scientific data mining that's been taking place is of tremendous value to all of us that have vested interests in the bay and the beach. Both those of us that have property on the beach, manage property on the beach, or live in the greater community, to include parts of Kapalua, but definitely Napili, Hau, and even over to the Kahana border. But I would like to just put this on the table. If you take a look at what's been happening as it relates to beach restoration, first of all, starting in Waikiki, where they replaced that beach probably 4 times now that I can recollect. And the effort that's being put forth for Kaanapali Beach and the kind of pushback that they're getting from the local community, I think it's going to be an ongoing challenge for Napili to really ultimately reach its goal, which is the restoration of the beach. Now, I am enthusiastically in support of it, and I think the owner of my hotel would be supportive of it too, if I could convince him that an investment of, say, $1 million is going to pay back some kind of value for that investment. And so I just put this on the table for us to reflect and give thought to, so that as we move forward in a very constructive way, so that we can accomplish goals that are really going to help replenish the bay, keep it clean, manage those turbidity and nitrate levels, because I think that is an ongoing effort that we can be successful at. Restoring the beach, bringing the sand back so that it has a long life, i.e. 10 years plus. Before we can even get to that step, all the permitting required,
Yes.
you know, all of the real deep engineering required. I mean, we've got a lot of other steps that are going to be required before you can get the first grain of sand, new sand on that beach. So I just put this on the table for us to give thought to. Does it make real sense for us to continue to pursue that effort, which is a good effort?
You should.
I don't deny that it's an effort that I think, especially those of us that have property on this beach, want to continue to strive for. But I think we really have to ask ourselves seriously, are we going to get the kind of money that it's going to take to restore that beach to the degree and level that we've been showing can be done, number one. And number two, can we give any kind of guarantees that all of the individuals and businesses that invest in that beach restoration, because it's going to be, you know, I mean, if you talk in terms of inflated dollars, I would say it's, and I'm just drawing this out of the air, you know, kind of looking at what happened in Waikiki. It's going to be a $2 to $3 million effort, folks. At the end of the day, there's no way it's going to be any less than that. So, is that investment going to pay dividends the way we want it? Or does it make more sense to use the monies that we will have on an ongoing basis to really address the other issues, like managing the runoff from the stream, managing the turbidity, and, you know, the restoration of the reef, and all of the things that we can have an impact on, that we can accomplish. And that may be becoming where we maybe shift our attention, looking at that ultimate goal, obviously, to restore the beach, because that is our ultimate goal. But that ultimate goal is going to be extremely expensive. So I just maybe would like us to give thought to, does it make any sense to maybe kind of shift our thinking a little bit to continue to make sure that we address the continuing clarity of our beautiful ocean and the reef, the maintenance of the reef, keeping it alive. And that's maybe where our top priorities are, and the beach restoration is something that we continue to work towards, but realizing that reaching that requires a lot of commitments from a lot of different areas, a heck of a lot of engineering, and one hell of a lot of money. That's
Okay,
what I want to
I can
offer.
respond.
I put that on the table because
Thank you.
anyway, yeah, enough said.
Sure.
Go for it.
Nani, we appreciate completely the need to focus in on water clarity and turbidity, and it's already being done
Right.
by several
Realize that.
groups. So that one's a good checkbox.
That's an ongoing effort.
It is an ongoing effort.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But as to doing it without a beach restoration, if all of a sudden your beach disappears, it gets very narrow, then you've got bigger issues that you won't be able to handle with the normal turbidity control efforts. You're going to have to somehow seawall, which is a word that can't be used anymore. You're going to have to seawall your properties to stop the flow of the soils out onto the beach. So you've got to combine both efforts. And I appreciate that it's an expensive effort to get a beach restoration done, but it's very well worth the monies. It gives you, if it buys you 10 plus years, then you can plan appropriately and continue to do the good efforts, make the good efforts in terms of turbidity, in terms of the beach restoration will help the coral. It has so many positives and so few negatives, except I guess the negative is the cost. And that comes down to funding. And funding has many
parts.
Many parts.
Absolutely.
And so that's where one of the efforts that Pat and her team have been making, and are finally getting to that point where they're getting recognition that that your project, your beach restoration is a viable project. And so much so that very recently, that's happening in one of the areas that you can pull in significant monies enough to pay for this.
And we're talking about the CFD fundings or whatever that.
I'll have more to say on that.
Okay.
So, but yeah, and Pat's up next, but I think we really need to look at it as, yes, you're right, the engineering effort has been long and difficult, but it's done. So that's already checked off. I've got a 100-page report that's done strictly on the design and build out of this to be provided to the OCCL to start with a SSBN 2 or SSBR 3, whatever happens in the streamlining process. So we've done the engineering. That's all paid and done for. The application effort is large, it's significant. And the streamlining was supposed to help with that, to minimize overlap and redundancy at the agency level. And that may still happen. So I think that you're well on the way to getting, going through the approval and permit process. And this year will be a bellwether for putting in all these applications and then moving that ahead while you're doing these other very important things of managing the desilting basins and looking, as Junior Nakoa said, about talking about people, using the wrong sunscreens and damaging corals. You have to do both. That's what I think.
Well, I agree with you. I'm not arguing that point. I totally agree with you. I understand that all of these efforts are necessary from all different directions. I just continue to, as I always have and always will, in my mind, try to come up with a really valued answer in response to the amount of money it's going to take for something that still is questionable in its life expectancy, i.e. that beach. I mean, those questions still need to be answered before that first grain of sand hits on that beach. Otherwise, I can tell you the funding, I just really question it. And I'm really supportive of it. Hey, listen, this beach is critically important to every single one of us sitting here. It's critically important. I just, anyway. Okay. And I don't want to put a damper on this effort because I think it's a good effort and it's something that needs to be continually focused on. But yeah, we got to come up with much more solid answers, I think.
So let me see if I can, so you're concerned about the duration or the return on investment, because if you had to do it all again in 2 years, that kind of thing.
Yes, Pat. Because
So,
there's absolutely no guarantee that beach is going to last. I mean, you guys know, we've lived here. I've lived here all my life. I've seen beaches disappear and you know what? They're gone in a heartbeat.
well, and the thinner they are, the more vulnerable they are.
No question. Absolutely.
And obviously with sea level rise, that's another variable that, when I started coming here 50 years ago, and I'm only 52 now, who ever thought of it? Nobody ever worried about it. The beach was hugely wide and so forth. Sea level rise has put another point of pressure on how we protect our coastlines all the way around, no matter what. So I understand that. And I guess the thing that makes the only guarantee you have is that you've hired somebody who really has looked at it, looked at the impacts of the waves 24/7 for several years, and kind of designs and engineers something that's going to be as good as it gets. but that's not a guarantee.
Yeah,
I think the thing that I remember Tara saying, and Yvonne, would you see if Tara would unmute, Tara Owens? If Tara's here, she said this several years ago.
She's on.
Tara's on.
Tara, is she on?
Hey Pat, I'm here. What's your question?
The only guarantee you can make is that it's, if you do nothing, what's going to happen?
Right. I mean, as it is island-wide and statewide, the conditions with beaches are, the erosion conditions are expanding and worsening, and with sea level rise, that's not a process that's going to stop.
that's a two.
So yeah, the do nothing alternative
Absolutely.
is generally not going to work in our favor either.
Yeah, it's a two-edged sword.
Yes.
And climate change is only getting worse. So that means that the erosion process is probably going to be even worse than it is now with beach sustainability. I mean, if you take a look at just what's happening in climatic changes right now, I mean, it's pretty obvious that it's not going to change unless it's not, so that two-edged sword, this is what I think, at least in my mind, is really critical. Understanding that what can be done to give the beach, the Pele Beach, a longer life? Because you're talking about widening that beach, so we have that berm structure.
And heightening the beach. Yeah.
With climatic change, all of that science maybe changes a little bit.
Well,
no,
it's great. It's a great question. In fact, I have built in the climate change, the sea level rise. And I've taken the conservative approach, the intermediate approach that the scientists will all understand. It's one of the forecasts that NOAA has come out with and others have come out with. And the forecasts, of course, vary. But if you take an intermediate to high case, high meaning the sea level rising more significantly, then you can design enough conservative process and shape and design to build that beach to last longer. And that's what I've done here. I mean, our team.
Sorry to interrupt there, Ian. I thought you were done talking, and I accidentally muted myself again, trying to have proper etiquette before I realized I wouldn't be able to unmute. So thanks for managing that for me. I just did want to though legitimize your comments, Nani, and I'm sure everyone would agree that a one-time beach nourishment project has risks associated with it. You could have an episodic event that would bring conditions that we might not be able to predict that could shorten the projected lifespan that Ian's come up with. That is a risk with beach renourishment that all the funders and the applicants, of course, need to understand. So I think it's really important what you're pointing out. And to further that, it's not going to be maybe a permanent solution. As Ian pointed out, normally beach restoration projects have to be repeated. And even then, when they're repeated, there's going to come a point where we may not be able to keep up with sea level rise. And I think what's going to be happening here is that you're also, in addition to combining all the solutions, as Ian suggested, continuing focusing on water quality, continue focusing on reef health, maybe continue focusing on beach restoration. But I think the regulatory agencies are also going to have you start looking at removal of infrastructure and relocation of infrastructure while you are also pursuing these other things, which may be an eventual outcome that we're all going to face.
Right. But if you have enough, Tara, Ian here, if you have enough time to plan that
That's right.
coastal resiliency, then you buy a logical plan to say manage retreat. And I know that.
Wow.
Well,
that requires a whole bunch of other stuff that.
well,
is
yes,
way
of course.
beyond the possibility. I can tell you right now,
Well,
there's no way. And I don't want to get argued.
okay, no, that's okay. And I was.
It throws a curveball into it that is just really difficult to address.
But I think the point is, if we do nothing, that you're not gonna have the opportunity to do any proper planning either. And if nature is just going to take it back, then, you know, everybody's gonna move to the mountaintop and not be living at the coast.
Right, Pat, and I agree with you 100%. What my point is, you know, maybe our focus should be really on what we can accomplish and what we can manage to make sure that the beach and the bay continue to improve where we can have an impact. That's my point.
And I understand that. I just don't know how you do it without doing what we've been worrying over for 15 years and looking at for 15 years. And at some point, and I think we've made great strides, but
No question, no argument there. Absolutely
I
great
think
strides.
we are having to do it. I think the point is that it will now buy the time that you need
Right.
for whatever else has to happen. And it doesn't mean that everything else shouldn't go on at the same time. We continue to say, don't put sunscreens in the water. We can have continued to educate people about not, you know, over fertilizing and so forth and so on. So we're trying to protect the health of the bay. Absolutely. And that will help. And I think the coral reef enhancement will help. And I hope we can get there in a parallel kind of process. But you aren't allowed to do those things together. So you have to take it, and that's just regulatory stuff that you have to deal with. So you have to kind of decide to take the steps in a stepwise way that the regulatory agents have decided is appropriate. Anyway, I'll come back to more of that and the funding and so forth, which is part of it. And what I hear you saying is, if I give $1 million, how do I know I'm going to get that back, that value back? What's my return on investment? And as a businessman in the Pele Bay or anywhere along these beaches, that's a valid question and needs to be answered for sure. So, anybody else? Yvonne, do you have other questions from people on Zoom?
Yes, a couple. I've got a comment and then a 3-part question, and then Leonard has patiently had his hand up this whole time as well. So I will start by reading the comment put in from Steve Rhodes. If one of the goals is reef, coral, and beach protection, and doing so cost effectively with minimal disruption, there is no better solution than biorock. It's being used around the world with impressive result. And then he gave us a link to view some videos, globalcoral.org.
Right.
So that's with Steve's comment. And then Amy sent in a 3-part question. The plan to protect the sand from continued erosion is the vegetation on a dune, not any hardening mechanisms like T-groins. Is there any plan to remove any of the current hardening, such as rocks and seawalls?
Okay. So the first one is about biorock being used to regenerate the reef. Is that correct?
He was just a comment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's many different approaches to reef restoration, and that is certainly one of them. And we are looking at all of the possible solutions. And making sure that these would be, or this, whatever technique would obviously have to be approved at all levels of government. And also it has to make sure, we have to make sure it's custom fit for the bay to be effective. And so, yes, we are looking at bio-rock as well. The next question was regarding the use of T-groins or the dune that we're planning. So the dune that we're planning is it's a naturally vegetated dune up against the property lines, the front yards, if you will, of the resorts, and is the last stop for wave run-up. And it's natural. It's it would be planted by native Hawaiian plants. We've done projects like this before, and they're very effective. Tara can tell you about the project that we have in Unstable Road, and the dune restoration has been incredible. This has allowed us to keep all but the very, very highest waves off of the lawns of the properties over on Stable Road Beach. And we are not planning any groins for this first beach nourishment. As I mentioned earlier, the aesthetics for Napili are paramount. And there's no, we're not discussing in any way seawall usage. It's not allowed. It's not in any of the COMAP or management plans for the coast. So we would never consider that, but we certainly aren't going to consider seawalls.
The last part of the question was, is there a plan to remove any of the current hardening, such as rocks and seawalls?
We've already started on some of that, as you'll hear me go into, and have at least one other spot in mind too. So I'll say more about that in my presentation. Okay.
Okay, so then lastly, we have Leonard. Did you have another comment or question?
Yeah. Oh, hold on. I gotta stop this meeting over here. Council meeting. Okay. Yes, sir. What's your name? Ian.
Yes, Ian. Hi.
Are you, brother? Yes, sir.
Really good.
Where
You, Leonard?
Yes, sir. Where you live, bro?
I live Stable Road.
Oh, where's that? The other side?
Other side, yeah, North Shore.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay, just checking because there's one in there because a lot of these like the people who do the research of all these bays that I've been talking about, they don't live over here. They don't live over here on Maui. But at Jim Buca and Tara Owens, the buggers, they've been involved with this. Well, I don't know about this one, but the Kahana one, I've been involved with them and been welcome. But question I'm gonna ask you, in your presentation, you was talking about this was starting from 2006. This all the stuff, like all the work that the foundation been working on and all that stuff was from 2006.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So how you guys talking about planning for retreat? We do this and we get 10 years for plan for the retreat. That one of the things you guys should have done was listen to yourselves. Was that if you guys are doing this since 2006, you guys should have been planning for the retreat. So in 2022, you guys ready? You guys ready for move? You know what I mean? I'm going according to your presentation, brother. And then one other thing you was talking about is the construction. Yeah, you said it's going to take 35 days, and it's going to limit access to this beach. You didn't talk to us. You talk to us who live here that like to go to the beach. I know one diver, but you talk to the guys that the fishermen and They live off that they call them their ice box. Did you go talk to them about 35 days of not being able to access that beach? And also you were saying in your report, it says you the new sand that you like do for, I'm gonna talk about it, but for put on the beach is good for go get them from offshore. And I went comment about that with Angus McKelvey about that happening, and then Ellie Cochran, she went comment on the cultural advisor of Kanapali Beach Hotel, said that it's gonna be horrific if you guys go and grab that sand that's right off of the shore, because me personally have done a lot of spreading of ashes for your guys is people who own the condos over there for over 15 years. We've been taking our canoes, we paddle all the way from Canoe Beach all the way up to Napili Bay, and we will take the family and we go and we spread the ashes. We spread their ashes out there because they're so invested in that place. They want to be buried. They want to be spread out there. And so the cultural advisor from Kanapali Beach Hotel said, you go grab that sand with all of our mana, you know what I mean? And you go put them back on the beach. It ain't going to be a good sight, brother. Ain't going to be a real good sight. And especially while in Kanapali, we do a lot too. So you guys got to think about all this kind of stuff. That we practice our Hawaiian culture. We practice these practices. We do this. And so you guys, and then I live here. I live in my house, this house that I'm in right here, since 1975. And I've been going down to the beach forever. And you said you like bring back the beach to the 1990 days, dude. That's my stomping grounds. I was 20 years old at that time. That was my stomping grounds. That's when we started skimboarding like that. We used to make our own plyboard kind. So, I mean, what I trying to get there, and then I know get plenty. Angus's office is inside here. Sugimura's office is inside this meeting. I'm happy for them to be here. That's what I like here. I like see. But the whole thing, yeah, and then Angus McKelvey when mentioned this. You guys should be talking to the residents, us, not the part-time residents of that bay, us. I live here 47 years, and so, I mean, you also inside your presentation said the community. I'll tell you right now, the community, the local community, the Kanakas, I'm gonna say them, okay, the Howleys that live here 20, 30 years, that we call them Hawaiians, you know what I mean? Why we not contacted? Why we wasn't present? Why the thing wasn't put inside the Maui News? Why wasn't it put on, on Lahaina News, if anything? I heard about this meeting through Angus McKelvey's meeting that I had about all 3 beach restorations. I am very passionate about this. And the one brother that went testify about, he managed the place and they built that first hotel and all that kind of stuff. I feel your passion, brother. I feel. And, you have to go invested inside this thing. All you guys are. You guys, just like how I am invested inside this. You just come in all these scientific kind of big words, Nitrate or whatever, the turbidity, all kind of words. The bottom line is sand and water and dirt. And the reef, I'm not going to put the fake kind of reef over there. You're planning good reef for that. Your big one right in front that protects this place. I'm just saying, Brother Lee, Ian. Yeah. And then a lot of your comments, like you say, like to bring them back to the historical beach that it was. I heard that same statement at the other two beach restorations in West Maui. I don't know if you guys all come up with that. You guys go to college for learn that thing, but I heard it 3 times already. What else you get over here? What else you get over here? And yeah, and you mentioned it, and I mentioned it before. You said you're gonna get tractors, gonna get the big kind clamshell machines over there. What kind of damages do you think that those machines going to do to the reef that you guys trying to say you gotta like restore? You guys like do, and then all the marine life, you know, the like you said, the monk seal, you know, all that kind of stuff. You guys gonna tear up their place. You're gonna make them panic. They're not gonna come in. They're not gonna come. And you said you leave a stable or whatever, stable or whatever. They try doing one on that side, I think too. But you know, what else I get over here, bruh? Get plenty, but and hold on, I get some more notes, bruh. Hold on. I don't let you guys presentation go to waste, yeah.
No.
What else? Oh yeah, and then you know you're also saying that, you know, get the ties that come in here at this certain time of the year, certain time. It's natural, bro. It's been working like that for years. And you said, you guys have mentioned that it's humans that went screw up their place, which is building these structures too close to the ocean. And I'm gonna just give us about the one last thing I want to say. Hawaiians, yeah, the people that live on the beach, that take care of the beach, that when prosper off of the ocean, that, you know, the ice box. If the tide come into their house, I'm gonna tell you, you can ask any Hawaiian family that lives here. The tide start telling them to move. It's time to move. When you move, you mahalo the ocean. Mahalo for the prosperity of all those years of you know, taking care of the locals, taking care of their family, you know, all that kind of stuff. So think about it, guys. You know, I just send shucks, I forget who I sent them to, but I'll send my email, I'll send my number. Call me up, bro. I love this kind of stuff. I love this, anything to do with my neighborhood. Woo-hoo! Call me up, bro. I want to get involved. And call me up. I'm not joking. I'm very passionate about our ocean. I'm very passionate about Napili, Kahana, and Lahaina. Shoot, mahalo. You guys have a good one.
Junior, send us your email and your phone number so we know how to reach out to you. And doing this by Zoom has allowed us to spread the word farther. And that's what the good thing that has come out of this pandemic, because before we just didn't have the room for people to crowd into one little conference room. So send us your email.
Yeah, Pat, thank you so much. Thank you. I mean, I forget who I sent them to, but I send them. I send in my email.
I have it.
Yeah, yes, sir.
We got it.
I would send them, and let's work together. Maybe there is a solution, but try to include us.
Yeah, good points, Leonard.
All right. Any more questions from the Zoom side?
No.
Okay, thank you so much. And I'm going to move forward then. So the next slide. So this is slide 34, and Amy asked about removing hard structures. Will the ocean remove this hard structure for us? This is a picture of the old stairs that were built in probably the late 80s. Concrete stairs down to the beach at the southern end of the beach. And in mid-2019, and they had been destroyed pretty much in 2017, but the final blow, which resulted in this mess, was in mid-2019. And in the process, this was the south swell and the king tide that created such a chocolate pudding mess in the bay. But anyway, we've been working on this then with state and private and county grant funding to take the old stairs away, these old stairs away. And Tara worked with us and consulted with us as the coastal geologist to relocate them slightly so they're more protected. And we've had plans built that make the new structures more resilient. So let's just take a look at that. The next slide. And I'm sorry, this is tiny for you to look at. I'm going to see if I can you see my?
For Maui, I would just like to say, as a citizen and resident of the Haiku area, mahalo the council for making it possible for our restrooms to be completed at the Haiku Community Center. They're a valuable part of our community infrastructure, not just for the sports teams that use the area.
Ask, yeah, Yvonne to mute
Mute,
everybody.
Sorry, Yvonne? Hi. Could you mute everybody?
Yep, I did.
Council meeting. Thanks.
Okay, I'm not sure whether you can see my mouse working. I think not, but this is an overview of the new stairs that are going to be built. The old stairs have been removed. All of the old concrete structures in that on that headland have been removed. And so now we're ready for construction, which I hope is going to happen and then start happening in the next week. The stairs, you'll see the sort of black and maybe
I've got
good.
See, I've got mine.
Good. The stairs are going to be Trex decking and they're going to be open tread. Okay, so the sand can flow in and out as it does seasonally without any damage. And then across this this spot in the center is going to be an elevated dune bridge area. The headland is concave there, so rather than being on grade and pounding on the soil, it's going to be slightly above grade and protect the headland from further erosion and erosion damage. Then we have to come around the corner.
Where, Pat?
Down south more here.
Oh, right. Okay.
And this is where the old beach shower was. I'll show you a picture that just shows you how much that area has sunk, has receded. So all of this part that's gray is going to be Trex decking, elevated, and then it comes back down to the old path and continues. The old path will stay in place. And we still are about $26,000 shy of having the money to do all of that gray part.
Yep.
But we're working on continuing to do that, and we will at least route it that way to protect the headland more. Okay, next slide. So these are pictures that I took last week, and the one on the left shows where the old path was that went down, and again, Ian, this area here was where the shower was.
Yep.
And that whole area of the path has really sunk in erosion, and so we will be all elevated coming down that way and tying back into a more stable place. And
Real quick question.
Yes.
The photo on the left
Yes.
is looking north?
North.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, it
So we're
is.
looking from your The building in the background is the Pele Bay.
Yes.
Okay.
Good, good. And then this is where the new stairs will go down to the beach, the picture on the right. And you can see all the old structure has been taken out, but it will go down in an area that's more protected by the shape of the headland. So it'll go that way. Okay, so this is being the funding for this and the permitting for this has not been an easy project either, I will say. 2 different state organizations and several different county planning department, the OED and so forth and so on for doing permitting and for funding it. But it is happening and it will be in place sometime in 2022. That's all I can say. All right, next slide.
Excuse me again.
Yes,
I thought I thought the foundation got $75,000.
yes, it's going to be about $250,000 or $60,000 to do this.
Oh, my God.
That's the way it works.
Well, hey, listen, I realize that. Just take a look at the bypass and how much that costs.
I'm just, you know, part of the reason, part of the costs are because of all the environmental protections that you put in place.
Understand that.
So, you know, you could do these things for very little money back in the day when nobody was too concerned about that. These days, not so. No, I'm blown away too, believe me. All right, next slide, please, slide 37.
37.
So you raise a good question and a good point. These things cost money. They cost more money than I, at my advanced age, ever would have thought I'd spend on anything. But let me say what we've done. Since we decided in Q3 2017 that we were going to take steps to restore the beach, private donations, only private donations from the Napili community, that means from the resorts and from the individuals who are owners here, have been over $300,000. So roughly, because 2020 was such a disaster, in terms of economics, roughly we've raised $100,000 in the 3 years that we've been working at it. And that's amazing. In order to get the rest of the preparations and permitting work done that's forecast by Ian, we'll need about $85,000 more this year. And if at the same time we start to do the preliminary work on reef restoration, which again has a lot of careful controls in it, it'll be another $60,000 is the estimate that we have. And we will continue to work on that. But to bring back the beach in 2023, which is where we'd like to aim it now, we've moved it out based on the pandemic, it's $2.5 to $3 million. So that isn't a number that's going to be reached with cookie sales or just asking people to give $200 a year, which is what we do ask people to do who are owners here. This needs something bigger and more sustainable because there'll be more work that needs to be done downstream. So in
Slide 38.
2018, slide 38, 2018, Maui County Council decided that a community facilities district, and they have an expert in putting these kinds of special tax districts together. And they hired him, and he has worked with them. And in 2018, they passed an ordinance that said, indeed, community facilities districts, or Napili has an improvement district, but it's a special tax district which tax a bit of money onto your property taxes each year and does it in an equitable way to share the cost for something that is a community benefit, a community resource. The state of Hawaii has not used these for beach nourishment yet, but that is an allowable use. And I'll come back to that in a minute. This is the way we drew the map that would be our community facilities district that we will propose to county council, because this is the map that shows the commercial properties, the vacation type rentals, hotels, condominiums on the Pele Bay. This is what we're looking at being in our conservation or our community district. And we have from 40% owners of 40% of the properties in this district, we have gotten an in favor support letter. We have to have 25%. We've got 40%. People want to preserve and conserve this beach and bay. And the county has hired now an attorney to help set up these districts, which is great. And we have prepared a formal application and asked to be heard by the county council. So far, this hasn't happened, but this morning I had outreach from a council member who has asked for us to be in contact with her. And I will, during this coming week, send her give the council a full application from the Pele to apply for this type of facilities district for us to fairly and squarely share the costs of conserving and preserving our beach and bay. Right now, I can tell you the range of donations when you just ask people if they will contribute. We have many people who have not given one nickel. And we have one donor who is able to do so, who has given us this year $20,000. So we want to smooth that out. That's not sustainable. We need to have some sort of mechanism in action that lets everybody contribute a small amount and get the job done. Many other states use these types of districts to fund things like hospitals, parks, desilting basins and dams, and so forth. So that's the model. That's what we're aiming for. We try 39. Okay, so the pros of putting this together is, as I said, that the costs are fairly distributed across the district. You're not leaning on one or two people to support everything. And it allows you to float a municipal bond to cover the big expenditure when the money is needed, instead of trying to slowly accrue the money. And I said, you know, $100,000 per year is what we've been getting. Well, it would take us to get $2 or $3 million. It'll take us longer than the beach will be here. So a bond is what you need at this point. Once the project's finished, then the small property tax uptick will create a sustainable fund for handling future restoration work, like a reserve fund, like the state put in place for condominiums back in the 70s when they were just starting and people didn't have enough money in a reserve fund to repair roofs and big expenditures on these properties. So it's the same concept. The cons, okay, this kind of tax district hasn't been used for beach restoration in Hawaii. And the Maui County Council has asked in the presentations from Kahana and so forth, who will be responsible for upkeep and how much impact on the county resources will be caused by managing the bond, et cetera. So fair enough questions, and we will be hoping to be working with them in Q1 of 2022 to answer those questions for Napili Bay. Okay.
Slide 40.
Slide 40. Are there any other funding options? Well, FEMA put out a brick as building residual or resilient communities. We applied for it, so did Kahana. None of the beach restoration projects were funded, period. It's not in their wheelhouse yet, I guess you could say. There are some other possibilities, and we certainly have been in contact with Senator Schatz's office in terms of some of the infrastructure funding when it comes due open, and we will apply for those grants. The advantage we have as this foundation is that we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We can apply for grant money. We usually have to match it too, so it's not a free ride. But we have our eyes on those, and doing reef restoration and removing and replacing the hard structures like the mid-beach public access path may be candidates for grant funding, and we have our eyes open on those too. And as grants open up, those may be able to be funded separately through grants. How can you help? If you're an owner at Napili, donate $200 a year for each resort unit you own. This year alone, with the number of units in the bay, that would give us $134,000, which would cover all of our upfront work still needed this year and next. And to continue to support, and this is, I'm going to lean hard on those of you who are Napili residents and Maui residents. Talk this up with the Maui County officials who you know. Vote so that they feel supported and that the community is supportive of a community facilities district to fund this kind of work. Fund returning our beach sand to the dry beach by the end of 2023, or as soon as we can do it. All the permits and things are in place. I'm gonna stick my neck out here a little bit too and say, you know, since 2006, starting work on this project, we had heard and seen, and our first big infrastructure project was repairing, remediating the outlet valve on the Pele 4-5 desilting basin, which from 1993 to when we fixed it in the beginning of 2012 had no functional outlet valve. Mountains of beach sand from the beach plug at the end of the ephemeral stream poured into the bay. And that's much of the sand that Ian has found sitting just offshore in the bay, sitting there. And it was really pulled out into the bay by these massive events several times a year. And then the whole beach, a whole bay would be full of muddy water for a week or 10 days. And it got worse and worse and worse until we got grant money worked with NRCS to build a proper outlet valve that has 3 levels. So you can still let the water off when it's too high, but it really retains the water, the muddy water and the storm runoff the way it was supposed to do in the first place, lets it silt out, and then runoff comes. That's not dirty water. We also did the grass waterway. And if you are local, you've seen today that they've shaved the grasses around the outlet swale, but the swale still has grasses in it, which also filter any runoff. Okay, so I just had to say that because it's been on my mind. And then bring us other great ideas. And Leonard sounds like he's got some great ideas, so we will certainly keep him in the loop. And any other local folks that want to be involved, send Napili Bay and Beach Foundation at gmail.com your emails and say you want to be involved. So this is the beach and bay that we all love, and this was taken by drone in 2020 when there weren't very many people at the beach, and it looked very lovely. And if you'll notice the wonderful basalt shelf across the bay, that's also in our benefit, and the headlands are in our benefit in terms of the natural shape of this beach and bay, in terms of protecting it from further erosion. So I think that's all I have, and I am happy to take questions, and the whole team can take questions. Let's do this, folks. We can do it. We need to do it. It buys us time for whatever the future is going to bring. Aloha.